The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the weathered ranch house, just as Katherine Greene's vision began to swim, her fingers losing their grip on the leather seat as waves of fever and exhaustion crashed over her like the Pacific tide she had crossed weeks ago to reach this God-forsaken frontier. She had traveled 3,000 miles from Boston to Nome, Alaska, responding to a carefully worded advertisement seeking a bride for a rancher in need of companionship. But the journey through the Alaskan wilderness in late summer of 1897 had nearly killed her. The driver had warned her that the last leg would be rough, that the gold rush had turned these northern territories into lawless stretches where danger lurked behind every spruce tree, but Katherine had been determined. She had nothing left in Boston except memories of her parents' deaths from consumption and the boarding house where she had worked herself to the bone for pennies. The promise of a new life, even one built on the pragmatic foundation of a mail-order marriage, had seemed like salvation. Now, as she stepped down from the coach on trembling legs, her carpetbag clutched in one white-knuckled hand, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The ranch house before her was small but sturdy, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney releasing a thin ribbon of smoke into the clear August sky. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the season. The land stretched vast and empty around her, punctuated only by stands of timber and the occasional call of a raven. The driver deposited her trunk in the dirt and tipped his hat. "This is the Peterson place, miss. Good luck to you." Before Katherine could respond, before she could ask him to wait just a moment while she gathered her courage, the coach was pulling away, leaving her alone in the clearing with nothing but the sound of wind through the trees and the hammering of her own heart. She took 3 steps toward the house, her vision blurring at the edges, her body burning with fever that had been building for days. She had caught something on the steamship from Seattle, some illness that had started as a cough and progressed into this consuming heat that made her skin feel like it was on fire. The 4th step never came. Her knees buckled, the world tilted sideways, and Katherine felt herself falling toward the hard, packed earth. She never felt the impact. Darkness rushed up to claim her, merciful and complete. Ethan Peterson had been mending fence line when he heard the distant rattle of the stagecoach, and his stomach had twisted into an uncomfortable knot. He had been trying not to think about the fact that today was the day she was supposed to arrive. The woman who had answered his advertisement with careful, educated penmanship, and a small photograph that showed a serious-faced young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. He had not wanted to place that advertisement. His sister Margaret had done it without his permission during her visit last spring, convinced that he was wasting away in loneliness on this remote Alaskan ranch. He was only 26 years old, but some days he felt ancient. 3 years ago, he had come north with the first wave of gold seekers, but unlike most, he had seen the real opportunity was not in the gold fields, but in providing beef to the miners who flooded into Nome and the surrounding territories. He had claimed this land, built this house with his own hands, and slowly built a herd that now numbered nearly 200 head. It was a good life, an honest life, but it was solitary. Still, the idea of a mail-order bride had seemed desperate and foolish. He had written to Margaret, telling her to cancel the arrangement, but his sister had already set things in motion. The letters had come from Katherine Greene in Boston, and despite his reservations, Ethan had found himself responding. Her letters were thoughtful and direct. She did not romanticize what this life would be, and she asked practical questions about the weather, the isolation, the work required. She had been honest about her circumstances, about being alone in the world and needing security. He had appreciated that honesty, even as he questioned the wisdom of bringing a city-bred woman to this harsh land. Now, as he rode back toward the house, he saw the trunk sitting abandoned in the yard and his heart kicked against his ribs. He urged his horse into a gallop, covering the distance in seconds, and then he saw her. A woman in a dark traveling dress lay crumpled near his front door, her carpetbag spilled open beside her, its contents scattered in the dirt. Ethan was off his horse before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to her side. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over her for a heartbeat before he touched her shoulder, turning her gently onto her back. Her face was flushed with fever, her dark hair escaping from its pins, her breathing shallow and rapid. Even in her current state, he could see she was the woman from the photograph, though thinner than he had expected, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of recent hardship. "Miss Greene," he said, his voice urgent. "Miss Greene, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Her skin beneath his touch was burning hot. Ethan did not hesitate. He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, and alarm shot through him. He carried her quickly to the house, shouldering the door open and bringing her into the dim coolness of the main room. His house was simple but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a sturdy table and chairs nearby. A kitchen area occupied the back corner, and two doors led to the bedrooms he had built. He carried her to his own room, the larger of the two, and laid her carefully on his bed. The quilt beneath her was one his mother had made years ago, one of the few possessions he had brought north. "You're safe now," he said softly, though he did not know if she could hear him. "I've got you." He pulled off her boots, noting the worn soles and the quality of the leather, which had once been fine but was now scuffed and damaged from hard travel. Her dress was damp with sweat, and he knew he needed to cool her fever, but propriety warred with necessity. Finally, necessity won. He could not let her burn up in soaked clothing. Ethan worked quickly and clinically, removing her outer dress and petticoats, leaving her in her chemise and drawers. He covered her with a light sheet and then hurried to the kitchen to pump water into a basin. He grabbed clean cloths and returned to the bedside, where he began bathing her face and neck with cool water, trying to bring down the fever that raged through her body. As he worked, he studied her face. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features and a small scar near her left eyebrow that the photograph had not shown. Her hands, when he bathed her wrists, were rough from work despite her educated manner. She had told the truth about working in a boarding house. These were the hands of someone who had scrubbed floors and hauled water and known real labor. Hours passed. The afternoon light shifted and lengthened, throwing long shadows across the floor. Ethan changed the water 3 times, continuing to bathe her skin, trying to leach the heat from her body. At one point, she stirred and murmured something he could not understand, her head turning restlessly on the pillow. He touched her cheek, his voice low and soothing. "Easy now. You're safe. Rest." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber visible through his small window, the fever finally began to break. Her skin felt cooler beneath his touch, her breathing deeper and more regular. Ethan sat back in the chair he had pulled beside the bed, his shoulders aching with tension he had not realized he was holding. Relief washed through him, profound and dizzying. He should move to the other room, let her rest in privacy, but he found himself reluctant to leave her alone. What if the fever returned? What if she woke frightened in a strange place? So he stayed, keeping vigil as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Alaskan sky. Katherine woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee, and for a long, disoriented moment, she had no idea where she was. The last thing she clearly remembered was stepping down from the stagecoach, and then nothing but fever dreams and the sensation of being carried, of a deep voice saying she was safe. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the unfamiliar room. Log walls, a small window showing morning light, a handmade dresser, and a chair beside the bed where a man sat sleeping. His chin dropped to his chest, his long legs stretched out before him. Katherine studied him in the soft light. He was tall. Even sitting down she could tell that, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands resting on his thighs. His hair was dark brown and needed cutting, curling slightly at the collar of his worn cotton shirt. His face was lean and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and features that would have been handsome in any setting. This, she realized with a flutter in her chest, was Ethan Peterson, her intended husband. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as her head swam and her muscles protested. The slight sound was enough to wake him. His eyes opened, blue-gray like a winter sky, and locked immediately on her face. "You're awake." He sat up straight, his expression shifting from drowsy to alert in an instant. "How do you feel?" Katherine's voice came out as a rasp. "Like I've been trampled by horses." A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "I imagined so." "You've been unconscious for nearly 20 hours. You collapsed right outside my door." Memory flooded back, along with embarrassment that heated her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I caught some illness on the ship from Seattle. I thought I could manage, but the journey from town must have been too much." "Nothing to apologize for." He stood and moved to a small table where a pitcher of water sat. He poured a cup and brought it to her, supporting her shoulders as she drank. The water was cold and sweet, the best thing she had ever tasted. "You need rest and food. When did you last eat?" Katherine had to think. "Yesterday morning, before I left town, the stagecoach driver offered me jerky, but my stomach was too unsettled." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Wait here. I'll bring you something." He left the room, and Katherine took the opportunity to look down at herself. She was in her undergarments, covered by a sheet, and her dress and petticoats were hanging on pegs near the window, clearly having been washed. Mortification swept through her. He had undressed her, had cared for her through her fever, had seen her in a state of vulnerability she had never intended. But he had been respectful about it, had done what was necessary, and for that she was grateful, even if it made this already awkward situation more complicated. He returned shortly with a bowl of broth and a piece of bread. "Nothing heavy yet. Your stomach needs to wake up gently." Katherine ate slowly while he watched, and the silence between them was strange but not uncomfortable. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and met his eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of me. I know this is not how you expected things to begin." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she would come to recognize as one he made when uncomfortable. "I expected you to arrive healthy and ready to make decisions with a clear head. That's on hold for now. You need to recover, and then we can talk about everything else." "Everything else," Katherine repeated. "You mean the marriage?" "Yes." He stood, clearly restless. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Greene, I never wanted a mail-order bride. My sister placed that advertisement without my permission. But once the letters started coming, once I began corresponding with you, I thought maybe it could work. You seemed practical and honest, and those are good qualities for this life. But I'm not going to hold you to any promises you made from 3,000 miles away. Once you're well, if you want to return to Seattle or anywhere else, I'll pay your passage. No questions asked." Katherine absorbed this, trying to ignore the sting of disappointment. "And if I don't want to leave?" His eyes met hers and something flickered in their depths. Then we talk. We figure out if this arrangement makes sense for both of us. But that's a conversation for when you're stronger. She nodded slowly. That's fair. But I should tell you now, I don't have anywhere else to go. Boston holds nothing for me but bad memories. I came here looking for a new start, and I meant every word I wrote in my letters. I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation. I'm stronger than I look right now. I believe you. And from the way he said it, she thought he might actually mean it. Now rest. We'll talk more later. Over the next 3 days, Katherine slowly regained her strength. Ethan moved to the smaller bedroom, insisting she keep the larger room for her recovery. He brought her meals, helped her to the chair by the window when she grew strong enough to leave the bed, and carefully avoided any topic more serious than the weather or the condition of his cattle. She learned that he had 300 acres of grazing land, that he sold beef to the miners and the growing town of Nome, that he had built everything on this ranch with his own hands, including the house she was recovering in. She also learned that he was patient and considerate, that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged occasionally in his comments, and that he moved with the confident economy of someone completely at home in his body and his environment. She caught herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his hands moved as he set down a tray, the line of his shoulders as he stood looking out the window, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. On the 4th day, Katherine insisted on getting fully dressed and joining him in the main room for breakfast. Her trunk had been brought inside, and she had selected a simple blue calico dress that had seen better days but was clean and comfortable. She pinned her hair up carefully and emerged from the bedroom to find Ethan at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. He turned at the sound of her step, and his gaze swept over her in quick assessment. "You look better. Color's back in your face. I feel almost human again." She moved to the table, noting how tidy everything was despite the fact that he lived alone. "Let me help with breakfast. Sit. You're not ready for work yet." Katherine bristled slightly at being ordered around but recognized the concern behind his words. She sat, watching as he finished cooking and plated the food with surprising competence. When he brought it to the table and sat across from her, the domesticity of the moment struck her forcefully. This could be her life. This house, this man, this vast and lonely land. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Ethan set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I think it's time we had that conversation." Katherine's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "I agree. First things first. Why did you really answer my advertisement? And I want the truth, not the polite version you might have written in a letter." She appreciated his bluntness. It made it easier to be honest in return. "Because I was desperate. Not in the way you might think. I had a roof over my head and work at the boarding house. But it was killing me by inches. Working 18-hour days for barely enough money to survive, watching other people live their lives while I scrubbed their floors and changed their sheets. I wanted something more. I wanted to matter to someone, to build something that was mine. Your advertisement was direct. You didn't promise romance or luxury. You promised partnership and honesty. That appealed to me." Ethan absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "And now that you're here, now that you've seen what this place really is." Katherine looked around the small house, thinking of the vast emptiness she had glimpsed through the window, the mountains in the distance, the isolation that would be her constant companion. "It's exactly what I expected, which means I still want to stay if you'll have me." "Why?" The question was almost challenging. "You could go to Seattle or San Francisco. There are more opportunities in the cities, more people, more life." "More of what I left behind," Katherine said firmly. "I don't want crowds and noise and the feeling of being invisible. I want space to breathe. I want to wake up knowing that my work matters, that I'm building something real. I want a partner, Ethan. Someone who sees me as an equal, who values what I contribute. Can you offer me that? Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down just slightly. I can. I won't lie and say this life is easy. Winters here are brutal. We're snowed in for months at a time. The work is constant and hard, and it's lonely. There are a few other ranchers within riding distance, and Nome is about 15 miles away, but days can go by without seeing another soul. If you need constant company, you'll go mad here. I don't need constant company, Katherine said. I need purpose. And if I'm being completely honest, I need someone to care whether I live or die. In Boston, if I had died in that boarding house, it would have been days before anyone noticed. You're a stranger to me, but you sat beside my bed for 20 hours making sure I didn't burn up with fever. That means something. Ethan's jaw worked, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with emotion. Any decent person would have done the same, but you did it. Katherine reached across the table, her hand hovering near his until he looked at her again. I'm not asking for love, Ethan. I know that's not part of this arrangement, but I'm asking for respect and partnership. Can you give me that? He looked at her hand, then slowly placed his own over it. His palm was warm and calloused, completely engulfing her smaller hand. I can give you that, and respect goes both ways. I need to know you'll tell me if this life becomes too much, if you're unhappy or struggling. I need to know you'll be honest with me. I will. She turned her hand over, squeezing his fingers. So what happens now? Now we figure out the practical details. Ethan released her hand and sat back, but his expression was less guarded than before. There's a preacher in Nome. We can ride into town next week, once you're fully recovered, and make this official. In the meantime, you'll stay in the big bedroom, and I'll stay in the small one. Once we're married, that can change, but I'm not going to rush you into anything. Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his consideration. Thank you, and what about the work? What do you need help with? Everything. A genuine smile crossed his face. I'm decent at ranching but terrible at keeping a house. Cooking, cleaning, mending, those things fall by the wayside when I'm dealing with cattle. And there's a garden plot behind the house that I've been neglecting. If you could manage the household side of things, it would be a big help. And eventually, if you want to learn ranching work, I can teach you. Some women out here ride and rope alongside their husbands. I'd like that, Katherine said, surprised by how much she meant it. I want to learn everything. I want to be useful. You already are, Ethan said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. They spent the rest of that day talking, sharing stories of their pasts, learning the small details that would help them build a life together. Katherine told him about growing up in Boston, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had taken in sewing to help make ends meet. She told him about watching them waste away from consumption, about the helpless rage she had felt as they died despite her best efforts to care for them. She told him about the boarding house and the exhaustion and the desperate need to escape. Ethan told her about growing up on a farm in Oregon, about losing his father to a logging accident when he was 16, about his mother remarrying a man who had no use for a grown stepson. He told her about heading north with dreams of gold and finding instead a love for this harsh land and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He told her about his sister Margaret, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 3 children, and who wrote him long letters full of worry and advice he usually ignored. As the sun set and Ethan lit the oil lamps, Katherine realized she felt more at ease than she had in years. There was something deeply comforting about this man who said exactly what he meant, who did not traffic in false charm or empty promises. He was solid and real, and she found herself genuinely looking forward to building a life with him. The next week passed in a rhythm that felt almost natural. Katherine took over the household tasks, throwing herself into cleaning and organizing with an energy born of genuine enthusiasm. The house had been neglected but not dirty, and she enjoyed bringing order to the space, making it feel more like a home. She baked bread and cooked stews, discovering that Ethan's pantry was better stocked than she had expected. He had been living on simple fare, but he had the basics she needed to make decent meals. Ethan spent his days working with the cattle, but came back to the house for meals, and they fell into a pattern of eating together and talking about their days. Katherine learned about the challenges of ranching in Alaska, the constant vigilance required to protect the herd from wolves and bears, the careful management of grazing land, the logistics of getting cattle to market. Ethan seemed genuinely interested in her efforts with the house and garden, and he listened with real attention when she talked about her plans to preserve vegetables for winter and mend his extensive collection of torn shirts. One afternoon, exactly 8 days after her arrival, Ethan came back to the house in the middle of the day and found Katherine in the garden, her hands muddy and her face flushed with exertion. "We should go to Nome tomorrow," he said without preamble. "You're strong enough now, and we should get the marriage taken care of before winter starts closing in." Katherine sat back on her heels, her heart suddenly racing. "Tomorrow, unless you need more time." His eyes searched her face. "I don't want to rush you, no," Katherine said quickly. "Tomorrow is fine. I just realized I'll need a better dress. I have one that's suitable, but it needs mending." "I can wait while you work on it this evening," Ethan offered. "And Katherine, don't worry, it's just a formality. Nothing between us has to change except the paperwork." But Katherine was not so sure about that. As she returned to the house and pulled out her best dress, a dark green wool that had been her mother's, she acknowledged to herself that her feelings about this arrangement were already more complicated than she had anticipated. Ethan Peterson was not the cold, desperate man she had half feared. He was kind and thoughtful and surprisingly easy to talk to. And when he smiled, which was rare but genuine, something in her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with practical partnership. She worked on the dress that evening while Ethan sat nearby, mending a harness. The domestic scene was peaceful, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional comment about their work. When Katherine finally set aside the dress, satisfied with her repairs, she looked up to find Ethan watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Nothing. Just thinking that it's nice having someone else in the house, quieter than I expected, but nice." Katherine smiled. "I can be louder if you prefer." That earned her one of his rare grins. "I'll let you know." They rode into Nome the next morning on Ethan's 2 horses, Katherine riding the gentler mare while Ethan took his gelding. The journey took several hours, following rough trails through forests of spruce and birch, and Katherine was grateful for the mild August weather. Ethan pointed out landmarks as they rode, explaining the territory and introducing her to the landscape that would be her home. Nome itself was a raw, bustling place, swollen with gold seekers and the businesses that served them. The main street was a muddy thoroughfare lined with hastily constructed buildings, saloons, and shops. Men far outnumbered women, and Katherine drew curious stares as they rode through town. Ethan guided them to a small white church at the edge of the settlement, where a weathered sign proclaimed Reverend Thomas Hayes as the minister. The Reverend was a round man in his 50s with kind eyes and a booming voice that seemed too large for his small frame. He welcomed them warmly, asking no uncomfortable questions when Ethan explained they had come to be married. Within an hour, with the Reverend's wife serving as witness. Katherine Greene became Katherine Peterson in a brief ceremony that was more practical than romantic, but somehow meaningful nonetheless. When Ethan was told he could kiss his bride, he hesitated, his eyes asking permission. Katherine nodded slightly and he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle and brief it was almost chaste. But the touch sent warmth flooding through her, and from the way Ethan's eyes darkened, she thought perhaps he felt it too. They had lunch at one of the few respectable restaurants in town, and Ethan bought supplies they would need for the coming months. He introduced Katherine to several people, including a gruff rancher named William Clark and his wife Martha, who lived about 10 miles from Ethan's ranch. Martha Clark was a sturdy woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a warmer smile than her stern appearance suggested. She pulled Katherine aside while the men talked. "So you're a mail-order bride," Martha said bluntly. "Brave or desperate?" "Both," Katherine answered honestly, and Martha laughed. "Good answer. You'll need both to survive here. Ethan's a good man, though, keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair and honest. You could have done worse." "I'm realizing that," Katherine said. "Come visit when you can," Martha offered. "It gets lonely out here for us women. We need to stick together." Katherine accepted gratefully, feeling the first stirrings of friendship. It was comforting to know she was not completely isolated, that there were other women nearby who understood this life. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable. Ethan seemed lost in thought, and Katherine was content to enjoy the scenery and process the fact that she was now a married woman. It felt surreal, but also right in a way she had not expected. When they arrived back at the house, Ethan helped her down from her horse, his hands firm on her waist. For a moment they stood close, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "So," Ethan said, his voice low, "we're married now." "Yes, we are." Katherine's heart was beating faster than the ride warranted. "Does that change anything for you?" Katherine considered the question seriously. "I think it should. We're partners now, officially. That means something." Ethan nodded slowly. "It does. Which bedroom do you want to sleep in tonight?" The question hung between them, weighted with implication. Katherine knew what he was really asking, giving her the choice about the physical nature of their marriage. She thought about the past week, about the conversations and the comfortable silences, about the way she had started to feel when he smiled at her, about the brief kiss in the church that had left her wanting more. "The big one," she said softly. "With you, if that's what you want." Something fierce and tender crossed Ethan's face. "It's what I want, but only if you're sure. I'm sure." And she was. This marriage might have started as a practical arrangement, but it was becoming something more, something real, and she wanted to honor that. That night, they came together with a tenderness that surprised both of them. Ethan was patient and careful, mindful of Katherine's inexperience, and she responded with a passion that had been buried under years of exhaustion and loneliness. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Ethan's arm around her and her head on his chest, Katherine felt something settle in her heart. This was home now. This man was hers and she was his, and together they would build something worth having. "Katherine," Ethan's voice rumbled under her ear. "Yes." "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you stayed." She tilted her head up to look at him, though it was too dark to see his face clearly. "So am I." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Katherine's life, though they were filled with hard work. She threw herself into learning everything about ranch life, starting with the garden and household tasks, but gradually expanding to help Ethan with the animals. He taught her to ride properly, to recognize signs of illness in cattle, to mend fences and handle rope. She learned that she enjoyed the physical labor, the sense of accomplishment that came from tangible results. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints that autumn was coming. The leaves on the birch trees began to turn gold, painting the landscape in brilliant color. Ethan worked longer hours, preparing for winter, and Katherine worked alongside him when she could, her hands growing calloused and her body growing stronger. Their relationship deepened in ways both physical and emotional. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. Katherine discovered that Ethan had a sharp mind and a deep love for this land that bordered on poetic when he forgot to be reserved. Ethan discovered that Katherine had a stubborn streak that matched his own and a sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe enough to show it. One evening in late September, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Katherine was tucked against Ethan's side, his arm around her shoulders, a blanket over their laps against the cooling air. "Tell me about the winter," Katherine said. "What should I expect?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently stroking her arm through the blanket. "It's hard. Snow starts in October and doesn't really stop until April. We'll be isolated for months. The cold is unlike anything you experienced in Boston. It gets down to 40 below or worse. We'll spend most of our time inside, keeping the fire going, rationing our supplies. The cattle are hardy and can survive on their own mostly, but we'll need to check on them regularly, break ice on the water sources, sometimes bring hay out if the snow gets too deep." "And we'll be alone here," Katherine said. "Just the two of us." "Yes. Does that worry you?" Katherine thought about it honestly. "No, I think I'll like it actually. No one but us, nothing but time. It sounds almost like a gift." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "That's a good way to look at it. I was worried you'd find it suffocating." "Not with you," Katherine said, then felt herself blush at the admission. But it was true. Ethan's presence had become comforting rather than awkward. She looked forward to seeing him, missed him when he was out working all day, and craved the nights when they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking and touching and discovering each other. "I'm falling in love with you," Ethan said suddenly, his voice rough. "I didn't expect that. I thought this would stay practical, but it's not. Not for me." Katherine's breath caught. She turned in his arms to look at his face, finding his eyes already on her, intense and vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "It's not practical for me either," she whispered. "I love you, Ethan. I think I've been falling since you carried me into the house and told me I was safe." He kissed her then, not gentle like in the church, but deep and claiming, and Katherine kissed him back with all the emotion building in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Someone who chose to be here, who loves this land like I do, who sees me and stays anyway." "I'll always stay," Katherine promised. "This is home now, you're home." October brought the first serious snow, and with it a shift in their daily routine. Ethan had been right about the isolation. Days went by with no sight of another person, nothing but the two of them and the vast white landscape stretching endlessly around the ranch. But instead of feeling trapped, Katherine felt liberated. There was something deeply satisfying about being snowed in with the man she loved, about the simple rhythm of their days. They woke early and worked together to care for the animals, bundled in layers of wool and fur against the biting cold. They cooked meals together, Ethan proving to be surprisingly helpful in the kitchen when he put his mind to it. They spent evenings by the fire, Katherine reading aloud from the small collection of books Ethan owned while he whittled or mended equipment. And at night, they lost themselves in each other, their lovemaking growing more confident and passionate as they learned what pleased each other. Katherine also discovered she was tougher than she had known. The work was hard and the cold was brutal, but she adapted. Her body grew strong from the physical labor, and her spirit thrived in the quiet peace of their isolated life. She had never felt more herself, more alive, than she did in those months of winter. In December, a brief thaw allowed them to ride to the Clark Ranch for Christmas dinner. Martha had invited several neighboring families, and the small house was crowded with people and laughter, and the smells of roasting meat and baking pies. Katherine found herself in the kitchen with Martha and two other ranch wives, swapping stories and recipes while the men talked cattle prices and politics in the main room. "Marriage suits you," Martha observed, studying Katherine with sharp eyes. "You look happy." "I am," Katherine admitted. "More than I ever expected to be." "Ethan looks different too," one of the other women said. "Less like he's carrying the weight of the world. You're good for him." Katherine glowed with the praise, and when Ethan found her later, his eyes seeking her out across the crowded room, the warmth in his gaze made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced. On the ride home through the snow-covered darkness, with the northern lights dancing green and silver overhead, Ethan reached over and took Katherine's gloved hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For taking a chance on this, on me. For making that house feel like a home." Katherine squeezed his hand. "Thank you for carrying me inside when I collapsed at your door, for taking care of me, for giving me a reason to stay." "Always," Ethan said, and Katherine believed him. January and February were the hardest months. The cold was relentless, the snow piling higher than Katherine had thought possible. There were days when they could not venture outside at all, when the wind howled, and the temperature dropped so low that exposed skin would freeze in seconds. But the house was warm and well built. Their supplies held out, and they had each other. It was during one of those frozen weeks in February that Katherine realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses and felt a persistent nausea in the mornings that had nothing to do with the salted meat they had been eating. At first, she was uncertain, but as the days passed and the signs became unmistakable, she knew. She waited until evening to tell Ethan after they had eaten dinner and were sitting by the fire. Her heart was pounding, uncertain how he would react. They had never discussed children, though in retrospect, she supposed it had been inevitable. "Ethan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the piece of leather he was working, his eyes immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm pregnant." The leather dropped from his hands. For a long moment he just stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, wonder, and something that looked like fear. Then he was moving, crossing to where she sat and dropping to his knees in front of her chair, his hands framing her face. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I'm sure. A baby." His voice was almost reverent. His hands dropped to her waist, pressing gently against her stomach where no change was yet visible. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, needing to hear it. "Happy." Ethan looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Katherine, I'm terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can put into words. A baby. Our baby." Katherine felt tears spilling down her own cheeks. "I was worried you might not want this yet. We haven't been married very long." "I want everything with you," Ethan said fiercely. "A baby, a life, a future, all of it." He pulled her down from the chair and into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "We're having a baby," he repeated, wonder still coloring his voice. They held each other for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the wind howling outside. Their small world suddenly expanded to include the life growing between them. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of planning and preparation. Ethan became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Katherine from doing any heavy work. though she insisted she was perfectly capable and would not spend the next 6 months sitting idle. They compromised, Katherine agreeing to let Ethan handle the most strenuous outdoor tasks while she focused on the household and lighter chores. They talked endlessly about the baby, about names and hopes and fears. Ethan admitted he was worried about Katherine giving birth so far from medical help, and Katherine shared his concern, but they both knew they had no choice. Martha Clark had delivered several babies in the area, and they would send word when Katherine's time drew near. It would have to be enough. Spring arrived slowly, the snow beginning to melt in March, the ice breaking up on the creeks and rivers. As the land emerged from its white blanket, revealing the brown earth and the first green shoots of new growth, Katherine felt as if she was being reborn along with the landscape. Her body was changing, her belly beginning to swell with the life inside her, and instead of feeling afraid, she felt powerful. In April, they received a letter from Ethan's sister Margaret, who had heard of their marriage from Ethan's brief note months ago. Her letter was full of delight and curiosity about Katherine, and when they wrote back with news of the pregnancy, her response was even more enthusiastic. She promised to visit in the summer if she could manage the journey with her children. As spring turned to summer and Katherine's pregnancy became obvious, she continued working alongside Ethan as much as she was able. They rebuilt the garden, planted vegetables that would feed them through the next winter, and tended the growing herd. The days were long and exhausting, but Katherine had never felt more fulfilled. She was building something real with the man she loved, and the future stretched before them bright with possibility. In July, when the midnight sun painted the sky in perpetual twilight and the land was green and alive, Martha Clark came to stay at the ranch. Katherine's time was drawing near, and both women agreed it was better for Martha to be present than to risk sending for her when labor started. Ethan set up the small bedroom for Martha and hovered anxiously, clearly torn between wanting to be helpful and feeling utterly useless. Katherine's labor began on a warm evening when the sky was painted in shades of gold and pink. The contractions started slowly, giving her time to prepare mentally, but by midnight they were coming hard and fast. Ethan paced outside the bedroom while Martha and Katherine worked through the pain together, Martha's calm competence a lifeline in the storm of childbirth. Near dawn, Katherine delivered a healthy baby boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure at being born loud and clear. Martha placed the squalling infant on Katherine's chest, and Katherine felt her heart expand so forcefully it was almost painful. This was her son. Hers and Ethan's. "Let his father in," Martha said, smiling, "before he wears a hole in the floor." Ethan burst through the door as if he had been waiting for exactly that permission. His eyes went immediately to Katherine, scanning her face for signs of pain or distress, before dropping to the bundle in her arms. His expression transformed into something Katherine had no words for, something beyond joy or love into some primal recognition. "A boy," Katherine said, her voice hoarse from exertion. "We have a son." Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his large, work-roughened hand reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fist. The infant's fingers wrapped around one of Ethan's, and Katherine watched her husband fall completely in love. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered. "You're perfect. I can't believe this is real." They named him Thomas after Ethan's father and called him Tommy from the start. Martha stayed for a week, helping Katherine recover and teaching her the basics of caring for a newborn, though Katherine quickly discovered that much of parenting was instinct and improvisation. By the time Martha left, Katherine felt confident enough to manage, though she was grateful for Ethan's unwavering support. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, taking over the night feedings when Tommy fussed, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and staring at him with an expression of bemused wonder. Watching them together, Katherine felt her love for her husband deepen into something that felt permanent and unshakable. Margaret arrived in August with her 3 children, and the small ranch house was suddenly full of noise and laughter. Katherine liked Ethan's sister immediately. Margaret was warm and outspoken, with her brother's blue-gray eyes and a more ready smile. She was delighted with Tommy and approved wholeheartedly of Katherine, pulling her aside on the second day to say, "You're exactly what Ethan needed. I knew it when I placed that advertisement, but I was not sure he would see it. I'm so glad you both gave this a chance." "I'm glad too," Katherine said sincerely. "I never imagined I could be this happy." The visit was wonderful but exhausting, and when Margaret and her family finally departed in September, Katherine and Ethan collapsed together on the porch swing, Tommy asleep in Katherine's arms, and simply breathed. "That was a lot of people," Ethan said finally. Katherine laughed. "It was. But I like them. Your sister is wonderful, she is. I'm glad you got to meet her." Ethan reached over and stroked Tommy's downy head with one finger. "Hard to believe he's almost 3 months old already." "Time is moving so fast," Katherine agreed, "but I'm not complaining. I love our life, Ethan, every part of it, even the endless winters and the isolation and the hard work." But he was smiling as he said it. "Especially those things," Katherine said firmly, "because I get to experience them all with you." The years that followed were not without their challenges. The winters remained brutal, the work remained constant, and there were setbacks and hardships. One winter, wolves killed 3 head of cattle before Ethan managed to drive them off. Another year, Katherine's garden was devastated by an early frost. Tommy went through a period of colic that left them both exhausted and frayed. But through it all, their partnership remained solid. They faced problems together, celebrated victories together, and built their ranch into something truly prosperous. Ethan's herd grew, and with it their reputation. People throughout the territory knew Peterson beef as quality stock, and buyers came from as far as Fairbanks to do business with him. Katherine expanded the garden every year, learning which crops thrived in the short Alaskan growing season, and preserving enough food to see them through each winter with plenty to spare. She also discovered a talent for sewing and began making clothing not just for their family, but to sell in Nome, bringing an extra income that helped them weather the lean times. Tommy grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's serious demeanor and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Katherine became pregnant again, and this time she felt less fear and more excitement. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born during a spring snowstorm, arriving so quickly that Martha barely made it to the ranch in time. Sarah was quieter than her brother, but no less determined, with Ethan's blue-gray eyes and Katherine's dark hair. 2 years after Sarah, another son arrived, named James, who proved to be the most adventurous of their children, always getting into trouble and keeping Katherine constantly on her toes. By the time James was walking, Katherine had her hands full managing the household and the children while Ethan worked the ranch with the help of a hired hand he had finally agreed they needed. Their home was chaotic and loud and full of love. Katherine sometimes looked around at dinner, with Ethan at the head of the table carving meat, Tommy helping Sarah with her food, and James banging his spoon and demanding attention, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was so far from the lonely, desperate woman who had collapsed on Ethan's doorstep 9 years ago. That woman had been looking for survival. This woman had found a life worth living. One evening, after the children were asleep, and the house was finally quiet, Katherine and Ethan sat together on their porch watching the northern lights dance across the sky. It was late August, and the air held the first hint of autumn's chill. Ethan's arm was around Katherine's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, a position that had become their default over the years. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Answering that advertisement, coming all this way for a man you didn't know?" Katherine turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Never, not for a single moment. Why? Do you regret not sending me away when you had the chance?" "God, no." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "I just want to make sure you're happy, that this is enough for you." "Enough?" Katherine laughed softly. "Ethan, this is everything. You're everything. Our children, this ranch, this life we've built together. I have more than I ever dreamed of having. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You saved my life in more ways than one." "You saved mine too," Ethan said quietly. "I was just going through the motions before you came, working myself into the ground and calling it a life. You made everything mean something. You gave me a reason to build something bigger than myself." They kissed then, slow and sweet, the kiss of people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Katherine rested her head on Ethan's shoulder and watched the lights shimmer and shift above them. "Tell me about when I arrived," Katherine said. "Tell me what you thought when you saw me collapsed on the ground." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently combing through her hair. "I was terrified," he admitted. "You looked so small and fragile, and I thought you might die right there in my arms. And I remember thinking how unfair it was, that you had come all this way for a new life and might not survive to see it. When I carried you inside, you were burning up with fever, and I just kept saying over and over in my head that you had to live, that I couldn't let you die without at least giving you a chance." "You told me I was safe," Katherine said softly. "I heard you, even though I couldn't respond." Those words meant everything to me. They still do. "You are safe," Ethan said firmly. "You always will be as long as I'm breathing. That's a promise I made the day I carried you across that threshold, even if I didn't say it out loud. You're mine to protect and cherish, and I take that seriously." "I know you do," Katherine said. "And I want you to know that I feel the same way about you. You're mine to love and stand beside. We're partners in everything." "Partners," Ethan echoed, and Katherine heard the smile in his voice. "I like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the lights and listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch settling for the night. Finally, Katherine spoke again. "I want to add on to the house. Another room or two. The children are getting bigger, and Tommy is going to want his own space soon. Already planning the next project." But Ethan sounded pleased rather than overwhelmed. "All right, we'll work on it next summer. I'll need to order lumber from Seattle, but we can manage it. Thank you." Katherine tilted her head up to kiss his jaw, "For always listening to my ideas, for treating me like an equal." "You are my equal," Ethan said simply. "In every way that matters. We built this together, Katherine. The ranch, our family, our life. It's as much yours as it is mine." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They expanded the house as planned, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch prospered, and with it, their family's security. Katherine became known throughout the territory as a woman of substance, someone whose opinion mattered, and she took pride in the respect she had earned. Their children grew and thrived. Tommy showed an early aptitude for ranching, following his father around and learning everything Ethan could teach him. Sarah proved to have her mother's talent for growing things, and Katherine gave her a section of the garden to tend herself. James remained their wild child, always exploring and getting into scrapes, but his adventurous spirit was tempered by a good heart and a fierce loyalty to his family. When Tommy turned 16, Ethan began talking about eventually turning the ranch over to him, ensuring the legacy they had built would continue. Katherine watched her son grow into a capable young man and felt pride mixed with bittersweet awareness of how quickly time was passing. She and Ethan had been married 18 years when Martha Clark passed away suddenly from a stroke, leaving her husband William devastated and alone. The funeral brought together people from all over the territory, and Katherine was struck by how much the community had grown since her arrival. Nome was a real town now, with schools and shops and even a small hospital. The wild frontier was slowly being tamed, though the land itself remained as vast and unforgiving as ever. After the funeral, as they rode back to the ranch, Ethan reached over and took Katherine's hand. "Promise me something," he said, his voice unusually serious. "Anything. If something happens to me, don't mourn forever. Live your life, be happy." Katherine's throat tightened. "Nothing is going to happen to you. We're going to grow old together, watching our grandchildren play in that yard." "I hope so," Ethan said. "But Martha's death reminded me that we don't get to choose when our time comes. I just want to know that you'll be all right, that you'll keep going." "Only if you promise me the same thing," Katherine said firmly. "If something happens to me, you keep living. You don't retreat into loneliness. You stay engaged with our children and the ranch and life. Deal?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "But neither of us is going anywhere for a long time." He was right. They had many more years together, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Tommy brought home a young woman named Anna from Nome, and they were married in a ceremony at the ranch that Katherine spent months planning. Sarah met a rancher's son at a community dance and fell head over heels in love. Even James eventually settled down, though it took him longer, marrying a spirited woman who was his perfect match. Katherine and Ethan's house filled with grandchildren, and they discovered that being grandparents was somehow even more joyful than being parents. They could spoil the children and play with them, and then send them home, enjoying the quiet afterward, but always looking forward to the next visit. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Katherine by taking her on a trip to Seattle. They had never been away from the ranch together, and Katherine was thrilled by the adventure. They visited Margaret and her family, now grown, and spent time exploring the city. But after 2 weeks, they were both eager to return home. "Too many people," Ethan said as they boarded the ship north. "Too much noise." "I miss the quiet," Katherine agreed. "And the space. I never thought I would be someone who craved isolation, but it's part of me now." "Alaska changes you," Ethan said. "It gets in your blood. I've seen men try to leave and come back because they couldn't stand being anywhere else." "I understand that," Katherine said. "This land gave me everything. It gave me you. How could I ever want to be anywhere else?" They were in their 50s when Ethan finally officially retired from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning control over to Tommy while remaining available for advice and help when needed. Katherine continued managing the household, though with Sarah's help the work was less demanding than it had been. They had time now for leisurely mornings drinking coffee on the porch, for long rides through their land just to enjoy the scenery, for afternoons spent simply being together. One spring day, Katherine found herself drawn to the spot where she had collapsed so many years ago. She stood there, remembering that desperate, frightened woman who had traveled so far on nothing but hope. Ethan came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the day I arrived, about how scared I was, about how close I came to dying before our life even began." "But you didn't die," Ethan said gently. You survived and thrived and built something amazing." "We built something amazing," Katherine corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me love." "And you gave me the same," Ethan said. "Before you, I was just existing. You taught me how to really live." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, remembering the beginning and grateful for everything that had come after. Behind them, their house stood solid and warm, full of the echoes of children's laughter and family dinners and quiet evenings by the fire. Around them, the ranch sprawled across acres they had worked and loved and protected. And before them, the mountains rose eternal, witnesses to the life they had created. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Katherine turned in Ethan's arms and kissed him, pouring decades of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Let's go home," Katherine said. "We are home," Ethan replied, but he took her hand and they walked together back to the house, their shadows stretching long in the golden light. They were both 70 when Ethan's health began to fail. It started subtly, with fatigue he could not shake and a persistent cough that worried Katherine. By the time they convinced him to see a doctor in Nome, the physician delivered news that shattered their world. Ethan's heart was weak, damaged by decades of hard labor and the harsh conditions he had worked in. There was nothing to be done except rest and try to preserve his strength for as long as possible. Katherine nursed him with fierce devotion, refusing to accept that their time was running out. But Ethan, always practical, began putting his affairs in order. He spent long hours with Tommy, ensuring every detail of the ranch operation was understood and documented. He wrote letters to each of his children and grandchildren, sharing advice and love. And he spent as much time as his failing body allowed simply being with Katherine, holding her hand, talking about their life together, and making sure she knew how much she was loved. On a clear autumn evening, with the northern lights dancing overhead and Katherine beside him in their bed, Ethan Peterson quietly slipped away. He died as he had lived, with dignity and grace, surrounded by the love he had built. Katherine held him as he took his last breath, her tears falling silently, her heart breaking even as it swelled with gratitude for the 53 years they had shared. The funeral drew people from all over the territory. Ethan had been respected and admired, known for his integrity and his kindness as much as his skill as a rancher. Katherine stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and listened to people share stories about her husband, each one a testament to the life he had lived. In the days and weeks that followed, Katherine discovered that grief was not the end she had feared. The pain was real and deep, but so was the foundation Ethan had helped her build. She was not the desperate woman who had arrived on this land 5 decades ago. She was strong and capable, with a family who loved her and a legacy to protect. She remained in the ranch house, helping Tommy and Anna manage the household while staying out of the way of their decisions. She spent time with her other children and her grandchildren, passing on stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. And on clear evenings, she sat on the porch and watched the northern lights, feeling Ethan's presence in the wind and the vast sky and the land they had loved together. Katherine lived for another 12 years after Ethan's death, long enough to meet several great-grandchildren and to see the ranch continue to prosper under Tommy's leadership. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, taking pride in everything her family had become. She died peacefully in her sleep one winter night, and her children buried her beside Ethan under a simple stone marker that read, "Katherine Peterson, beloved wife, mother, and matriarch. She came looking for safety and found a home." The ranch continued for generations after them, passing down through their descendants. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original log structure Ethan had built remained at its heart. And every person who lived there knew the story of how it all began, with a woman who collapsed at a cowboy's door and the man who carried her inside and promised she was safe. It was a story of courage and love and partnership, a story that became the foundation for everything that followed. The land itself seemed to remember them. On clear nights, when the northern lights danced overhead and the wind whispered through the spruce trees, old-timers swore they could sometimes see two figures standing on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sky together. Whether it was memory or imagination or something more, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that if any love was strong enough to transcend time and death, it was the love between Ethan and Katherine Peterson, the cowboy and his mail-order bride, who had built something beautiful and lasting in the Alaskan wilderness. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still told the story, still honored the legacy of two people who had taken a desperate gamble on each other and created a love that would echo through the generations. The ranch stood as a monument to what could be built when two people chose to trust, to work together, to love without reservation. It was a testament to the power of second chances and new beginnings, to the strength found in partnership, and to the enduring nature of true love. And so the story ended where it began, with a house on the Alaskan frontier, and the legacy of a love that had transformed two lonely people into something greater than themselves. Katherine had traveled 3,000 miles looking for survival, and found instead a reason to live. Ethan had placed an advertisement expecting practical help, and found instead the other half of his soul. Together, they had proved that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the most unlikely beginnings, and that home is not a place, but a person who carries you inside when you fall and promises you are safe.